Thursday, September 7th.
Brother Adrian from the Simon community was expected this morning. We used to get quite a lot of free food from the Simons, and I was hoping that we could persuade him to resume deliveries. Unfortunately, he came an hour late, and by that time I had gone. Apparently, Brother Adrian explained to those who were present that at the time it was difficult for the Simon community to deliver food regularly, but that he would bring some when he could. Over the last few days, I've tried hard to persuade a number of organisations who dish out food in the Bullring, the Simon community, Hare Krishna, the Bondway Night Shelter, to help us too. But they evidently consider us to be a lower priority. To some extent this is understandable and right. Still, why are there so many soup runs in the Bullring and not a single one here, when a better food supply would allow us to attract many more people from there and give them decent accommodation at the same time? Today Julian broke down under the strain caused by the responsibility of collecting the rent. No one seems to want to give him any money, and he declared that he was giving up. In the afternoon I went to the homelessness committee of Lambeth Council with Nancy Kershaw. Arthur was already there. Spike and Joe also came to the town hall, but they couldn't find the room where the meeting was to be held. I was bringing with me a petition from the squatters requesting the immediate attention of the committee to 4 demands: unblocking of drains, regular garbage removal, provision of portable loos, and provision of electricity. But the attention of the committee was captured by an ambitious plan for improvement of the building, recently drawn by Arnold Porter and his colleagues at the DEHCS. They propose to spend £34,000 on electricity supply, 6 toilets, a few showers, hot water taps, cooking facilities, roof repair and security. It was made clear that the council would not be able to spend a penny in the Belgrave until we had a licence from the owner of the building, authorising us to stay for a year or 2. According to his agent, the owner is quite willing to grant us a licence, and we were requested to give top priority to getting one. But my understanding from what was said at the meeting was that getting a licence will only be the first step into the complex bureaucratic procedures that will have to be gone through if the council is to help us in any substantial way. Rachel Webb, the councillor, is very keen on all of this and confident that things can move quite fast. But I am much more sceptical. As far as our immediate demands were concerned, Arnold Porter said that unblocking the drains was impossible without excavations, which in turn required the licence, that the provision of electricity was part of their improvement plan, and that providing and servicing portable loos quickly became as expensive as installing new ones. However, he promised to arrange a meeting with the garbage removal services to discuss the possibility of regular garbage collection. It's interesting that, like the soup runs, the council finds it much easier to do something for those who live in the Bullring, mainly because, unlike us, they're on council property. There are public lavatories in the Bullring, on which, according to Arnold, the council is going to spend an extra £60,000 a year from now on to ensure that they're kept open throughout the night. Anna Gupta came to the squat in the morning. We had a great time, sitting in the kitchen and chatting with Spike, Joe, Nick, Richard, Marianne and Steve. Attitudes to visitors range from suspicion to great friendliness. I, for one, believe that sensitive visitors can do a lot of good to the people who live here, and vice versa. Later, Anna Gupta and I went to the Bondway Night Shelter to see if they would be willing to put the squat on the itinerary of their soup run. As we were waiting in the corridor, someone knocked and we saw one of the volunteers going to the door, opening a small grid and talking to the poor bugger on the other side, then telling him that, sorry, we couldn't let him in because he was drunk, and then slamming the grid again. This horrifying scene, which brought back many memories of the days when I was working as a volunteer in a night shelter in Coventry, made a deep impression on me.
Friday, September the 8th.
This afternoon we found a mattress dumped in an empty tub on the second floor, burning inside. This was a disturbing discovery. It seems extremely unlikely that the mattress was there and in that state by accident, nor could anyone hope that this mattress could set the building properly alight. It looked like an act of aimless pyromania. I was told that earlier in the day there had been another fire on the top floor in the room where a serious fire broke out 12 days ago. At dinner time, Pauline cooked a terrific chicken curry using donated food, and I talked with Mike and a few others about the question of fire protection. We decided to organise a system of night vigils to reduce the risk of a tragedy. I also talked with Arthur for a while in his room. He's a difficult person to understand, really. He's very articulate and thoughtful, and must have been a very helpful and effective member of the squad before he sank into his present mood of disillusionment and contempt. At one point he told me frankly, "I hate everybody here." When I asked him why he stayed, he replied that he couldn't really explain, that sometimes he just wanted to go, but this place was part of his life and that he had this notion of staying until the end. For once, I slept in the office by the front gate because there's a clock in there and I wanted to get up early in the morning. Around 1 a.m, I heard sounds of fire, fire from the first floor. I rushed to see the first floor and found that Fred's room was in flames. It was a terrifying vision. People were running around in all directions, shouting and panicking. I immediately realised that we wouldn't be able to control this one, so I rushed down again, shouted, "Fire, fire!" at the top of my voice. The acoustics in the staircase were excellent, and I knew that I would be heard throughout the building, and then dashed to the phone box across the road to call the fire brigade. Then I went back and helped to evacuate the building. All sorts of people were still fast asleep in their rooms, unaware of what was going on. Those who were drunk or stoned were the hardest ones to deal with. As I reached the top floor, I found that it was filled with suffocating smoke. By that time, the police were already rushing up the stairs, and I heard them shouting, "Get down, get down!" So I took this as an excuse to turn back sheepishly and obey their instructions to get out. But I heard later that others went ahead and took considerable risks to help people get out of their rooms on the third floor. I also heard that Chris and Ray went right through the flames past Fred's room to rescue Dave, who was stuck in his room on the other side of the fire and was also limping. Where they found the courage to do this, I just don't know. Outside the building, I found that most of us had already gathered on the pavement and that the fire brigade had just arrived. We watched the fire helplessly. We were terrified at the thought that someone might be stuck in the building and made great efforts to figure out who was missing. I noticed that Marianne was the most useful informant. She seemed to know exactly who had been where at the time when the fire started. Eddie's name came up again and again. Someone said that she had seen him come out of his room and then go back in again. The thought that we might lose him was unbearable. One by one, the missing individuals made their appearance through the smoke, helped by the fire brigade, but Eddie was still nowhere to be seen. Meanwhile, there was much agitation on the pavement. Derek, the Scotsman, was screaming for his friend Donald, calling the firemen "English bastards!" A journalist was running around trying to put a story together and to find his way through the 3 different versions of the facts that Fred gave him, because Fred was pissed beyond redemption. Later, a ludicrous account of the event appeared in a local paper stating that 3 people had been hurt and that the building had no fire escapes. Anyway, a distinct smell of hash was floating around. The dogs were wandering about in a daze. And I was convinced that everything was over, that the dream was coming to an end, that we would never be allowed back in the building again. I looked at this little chunk of humanity huddled together on the pavement, at all those faces that were now a cherished part of my life, and that might vanish out of sight the next day. It was devastating. I was also terribly anxious about Eddie, but finally I saw him from a distance, mixing with the crowd. I rushed to him and told him how happy I was to see him, and asked him how he had managed to get out. He smiled and said, "In a helicopter."
Saturday, September 9th.
The police and the fire brigade refused to let us back in the building and told us that anyone who went back in would be arrested. They wouldn't even let us get blankets from inside. They just locked the building and went with the fire brigade and a journalist. So there we were, out in the cold, some of us without shoes or a shirt, wondering what was going to happen next. St Mark's was closed and there was no hope of spending the night there. I went up to Christchurch and banged on the door a few times, but nobody replied. I was about to go when John, the watchman, appeared with nothing on but a pair of shorts and asked me angrily what the hell I was doing there at that time of the night. I explained the situation and asked if we could spend the night in the hall of the church, but he was very reticent and said that he couldn't let us in without asking the vicar, and that in any case the vicar was not likely to help us because the last time they'd helped someone from the Belgrave, the candles had been nicked. I didn't insist and went back, helpless. 15 minutes later, John appeared on the scene and said that everything considered, he was quite willing to ask the vicar, who happened to be spending the night in Christchurch. The vicar immediately accepted, and the two of them hurriedly removed all valuable property from the hall, while I went to fetch my friends. Then the vicar went back to bed, but John stayed up with us, and I have to say that he was absolutely wonderful, helping us in every possible way. Nancy Kershaw was with us too, working tirelessly. For the first time, a strong bond seemed to unite us all. We were all in the same boat, sleeping together in one room on the floor, exhausted, not knowing what the next day would bring. After a short snooze and a round of tea, we debated whether or not to go back into the building in the morning. Everyone wanted to go back, but some of us, particularly those who were wanted by the police, were anxious to know the likely consequences, so we got in touch with a friendly lawyer and worked out all the legal details. At dawn, Richard and I sneaked into the building to fetch what was left of Pauline's chicken curry. On the way back, we saw a van delivering bread to the bakery round the corner, and we asked the driver whether we could buy a couple of loaves of bread from him. He said sorry, he couldn't spare any bread, but later caught up with us and said that if we wanted, we could have a whole bag of the leftover bread, which he collects from the bakeries to feed to pigs. At 7 a.m, we woke everybody up and fed them a terrific breakfast of chicken curry and pig food. Then I explained the legal situation, that we were very unlikely to be arrested, but that it could not be ruled out. It was agreed that no pressure would be put on anyone to go back, and that those who wanted to go would go there. We departed in the morning drizzle with the dogs, the chicken curry, the pig food, and I fear what looked to me like some of the blankets kindly supplied by the church for the night. It was an amazing procession of dossers and beggars and hippies, exhausted by the lack of sleep and the emotions, clothed at random, but resolutely going home. We got into the building through the side door and decided to meet in the common room after giving everyone 15 minutes to check the state of their belongings. We took the People Not Profit banner down and put it on the front gate, along with the legal notice that used to be on the back. Then we put a padlock on the front gate, on top of the police's padlock. I recognised my handwriting on the legal notice. It was like being back to the feverish beginnings of 7 months ago, with different comrades. Meanwhile, Richard and Ray proceeded to board up the area that had been demolished by the fire and to knock down the windows of that area, which threatened to fall on the heads of passers-by. These elementary precautions didn't seem to have occurred to the fire brigade. A few minutes later, we gathered in the common room. We all agreed that the first thing to do was to have a kip. After that, we started clearing the building, mopping the water, helping Dave and Fred, who've lost all their belongings in the fire, to settle into new rooms. Those who had not come early in the morning came later in the day. Some decided, quite understandably, to leave the squat. Several supporters visited us. All along I was convinced that the fire brigade would demand immediate evacuation of the building. I had no hope that we would be able to resist eviction, and I supported the repossession of the building mainly as a befitting finale to this grand story of non-violent direct action. I wandered around the building, heartbroken. Most of the doors having been kicked in by the fire brigade, I had the chance to see the inside of all the rooms. Once again I was struck by the love that had been put into arranging them, in making them comfortable, in bringing them to life with colours, plants, pictures of loved ones. Once again I thought that this place had truly been a home for the homeless, a refuge for young lovers, a place where so much friendship had grown. It had been a home because when you come down in the morning, you found a dog playing in the corridor with a tennis ball, the mail being delivered, tea on the stove, laughter or perhaps screams in the background, and someone to greet. I thought of all the companions I was about to lose in one merciless farewell: Pauline, Eddie, Marianne, Richard, Craig, Steve, Julie and Donald. I started crying. I went for a walk in the park across the road to find some relief. The sky was grey and melancholy. I saw an old man take a bag of crumbs out of his pocket and feed the birds. I thought to myself, why is this man doing this? Why, except out of love? Except if he cares for these little birds who will never be able to do anything for him in return. And had we not tried to live together in the same way, with nothing to keep our boat afloat but the care we had for each other? Had we not provided a fertile ground for this basic human instinct in a world with all its values turned upside down? Why did it have to end so miserably? I cried again. I cried even more when I considered how all along the homeless seemed to have been abandoned by almost everybody, by the council and the churches, by the night shelters and the day centres, by the anarchists and the Christians, and even by those who had started the whole thing but had then stood by, not knowing what to do next. The council had tied its own hands in bureaucratic knots. The churches were worried about their candles being nicked. The social workers and the charitable organisations working, I quote, with the homeless had found the whole project as an embarrassment. Those who had launched it now had other things to do, including me, most of the time since January. The anarchists and the socialists had taken little interest in this allegedly apolitical community, except for claiming in their magazines, of which they would occasionally leave a pile on our doorstep, sometimes with a few loaves of bread, that our project proved their point. The Christians had not recognised the people with whom Jesus had lived. Of course, many people had helped. There had been a lot of goodwill. Money had been given, the blankets, food, furniture, goodies of all kinds. But if one considered how much all this represented at the end of the day, compared to the real needs of the people who lived there, it seemed very little. They had done everything themselves. I also cried because meanwhile there was a lot of tension building up inside the squat, and I couldn't bear the thought that the whole thing would end with people getting at each other's throats. One source of tension was a diversity of suspicions about who was responsible for the fire. It was widely believed that the fire had been started intentionally, and a visit of the CID confirmed, so I'm told, that it was a case of arson. Given that we had 3 fires on the same day, this verdict does sound plausible. Though in the particular case of the 3rd fire, it also seems plausible to me that Fred, who was drunk that night, caused the fire by accident. He was in his room when it all started. Anyway, most people are convinced that the pyromaniac is still among us. Several names came up, and many promises that if the arsonist was found, he would be beaten to death, knifed, and even crucified. The other source of tension is that several people seem to have got it into their heads that they were going to take charge of the squat. We're going through a temporary organisational vacuum, and this, combined with the atmosphere of emergency, has convinced them that the time is ripe for a takeover. One of the candidates is Mel, who, it is said, will come and call a meeting tomorrow at 10 to explain the new regime. Another is Max, who's already been disruptive on several occasions. Max is quite friendly and sociable most of the time, but he can also be authoritarian and violent. He used to be a mercenary in the French army and fought in Algeria and Beirut before being court-martialed. He lives in the lodge across the backyard with his great friend Scum, a chap who strikes me as being more mature and positive in spite of his own fondness for knives, machetes and paramilitary attire. This evening, Max has made a lot of noise about the fact that from now on he was in charge. Whether Mel and Max are acting together or whether they're rivals, I didn't understand. In any case, these despotic attitudes are quite disturbing. I know for a fact that I have not been the only one to cry today.
Sunday, September 10th.
Yesterday's anxieties now seem like a distant nightmare. Today we're making a new start. For the first time since she told me that she wouldn't do the washing up, Marianne was full of life, and she spent the whole morning peeling potatoes and tidying the garden with a beautiful smile on her face. We were expecting Mel at 10 a.m. and he didn't come. I'm not very surprised. He tends to get carried away, and is not the first time that his bragging has come to naught. The spirit of unity that had emerged on Friday survived yesterday's tensions. Ray and I went to see the police and the fire brigade to find out what their intentions were. The police said that they were not interested, that they had instructions to avoid confrontations with squatters, and that they wouldn't lift a finger to evict us unless they had orders from the fire brigade or the council to do so. The person we talked to from the fire brigade referred us to the fire protection services and said that it was not impossible that the building would be evacuated, but in his opinion it was unlikely. We were due to have a meeting at 6 p.m. There were several crucial decisions to take in order to reorganise ourselves on a sound basis, and I foolishly anticipated my participation to be important, given the active role I had played during and after the fire. But when I came to the common room at 6 p.m, I was delighted to find that the meeting had already started and that everything seemed to be going like clockwork. Max, who bears a heavy responsibility for the failure of the last two meetings, was not there. A number of important decisions were taken. Dave is to start collecting the rent, and those who haven't paid by next Sunday will have to explain why at the weekly meeting. Pauline and Barbara are to be in charge of the kitchen. This strikes me as an excellent decision. Martin and I are to liaise with the council. Flowers are to be bought for Nancy Kershaw to thank her for what she did on Friday, and so on. All this is good stuff, with a nice and effective decentralisation of responsibilities. Touch wood. The only decision I didn't like was that of setting up a security team of 6 people with Og and Max as the main figures. But I don't think that this is part of a conspiracy to take over. Og has been keeping a rather low profile since the failure of Tim Saylor's second coming. More plausibly, they just like to play the para-commandos. Their main duty will be to organise a 24-hour patrolling of the building for fire surveillance, which is quite important. After the meeting, Og put a padlock on the front gate with obvious satisfaction. "Back to normal," he said. My spirits are back to normal too.
Monday, September 11th.
Spent all day from 6 in the morning until 1 in the night helping to move mountains of donated furniture from Camden to number 1 Clapham Road. There was an ominous incident in the morning involving Max. I was about to go through the door and get into the van to Camden when I saw Max shouting at Adam in the corridor and threatening him with a ridiculously large wooden hammer, an object that seemed to come straight out of a cartoon, with a head as large as 2 shoeboxes, so heavy that Max needed both hands to lift it. I went up to them and started trying to pacify Max, but his immediate reaction was to turn his anger and his hammer on me. Among other things, he accused me of having stabbed him in the back by moving the entrance from the side door to the front gate in his absence. I tried to explain to him why I had done this and that I had consulted Scum, who is also in the so-called security team. But he was really wild and told me that I had no business to reply when he spoke. Since I didn't shut up, he swung the hammer in my direction, but fortunately too short to hit more than the tip of my hands. I think he just wanted to frighten me. There was obviously little point in arguing, so I just shrugged my shoulders, walked past him and started making my way towards the front gate. He is following me, hammer in hand, shouting, and I thought, one blow of this hammer and he could crack my head like a nut, but it seemed unlikely that he would do so, and after what seemed like an interminable journey, I reached the gate and got into the van. This incident put me off, and I later found myself wondering how an end could somehow be put to Max's problematic presence in the squat. I even wished he had been taken through the door by those who were standing around when he threatened to hit me. But on reflection, I'm glad that he has another chance. An inspector from the fire brigade came. We took him round the building and he was obviously not impressed by our fire protection system. Like the environmental health chaps, he kept asking us, "Who is your leader? Who is in charge?" But he was very friendly and sympathetic, and he told us exactly what we should expect. He said that he would make a conscientious report stating clearly that the building was a serious fire hazard and that his superiors would have to make appropriate recommendations. He didn't want to rule out our being evicted, but emphasised that we were living in a political hot potato because of the coverage we've had in the press, and that everything else would be tried before taking that step. Without wishing to deny that the building is not terribly safe, I believe that the real problem lies less in the physical characteristics of the building than in the unmet needs of the people who live there. In terms of physical characteristics, it is true that we are hopelessly short of firefighting equipment, but on the other hand, there are wide and clear fire escapes all over the place and also wide staircases and corridors. The deeper problem is that there are all sorts of people here who have special and unattended handicaps. Old people who can't walk fast, people who go to bed drunk and don't hear alarms, people who lack the sense to blow out a candle before going to sleep. Nor does the fact that we remain deprived of electricity and a decent water supply have much to do with the physical characteristics of the building as such. The fire safety problem is a social problem. The gate is wide open again, and the security team is already slackening its supervision. I quote Og, "Back to normal." When I came home at 1 a.m, I found Craig and Fred on duty for the night. Craig was fast asleep by the gate. Fred was fed up with having to watch on his own and complained that he didn't even have a torch to patrol the building. I went up to my room and wondered whether I should stay up. I looked through the window of the corridor to other parts of the building, and since everything looked quiet, I told myself that I should relax and go to sleep. But as I was about to enter my room, I noticed that there was a candle burning next door. I decided to have a look around the building after all, and Fred joined me. We discovered 5 candles burning in different rooms, and in one case, at least, the occupant was asleep. And this is not to mention the fact that the maniac who started last Friday's fire may still be around, waiting for another opportunity. What on earth are we supposed to do?
Tuesday, September 12th.
Was out most of the day. In the evening, Dave told me that the fire brigade had been around and they proposed to request us to seal off the top 2 floors as well as the basement and to put pressure on the council to spend some money on improving the building. For legal reasons, their ability to put pressure on the council would once again depend on our getting a licence from the owner. In the evening, we had a visit from Anna Gupta and Mark Chapman. We had a great time chatting with Pauline and Craig in their room. Pauline, one of the youngest among us, is on the whole adorable, even if she has a rather strong personality and could be a real pain at times, as happened when she drove Peter away. Her enormously fat body and her filthy clothes give her a slightly repulsive appearance, but if you get to know her, you feel like hugging her, and her physique is perfectly suited to her new role of kitchen matron, which she's performing with great success so far. Max seems to have come off his high horse. I said hello when I met him and he grumbled something back. It occurred to me that he has been here for a long time without major incident, so there's no reason why it should not continue that way.
Wednesday, September 13th.
Today at 6 p.m. we were expecting Rachel Webb, councillor of Lambeth, and Arnold Porter for a discussion of what needs to be done regarding the fire safety situation. Just as Rachel and Arnold arrived, we heard loud shouts of "Catch him! Shut the gate! Kill him!" and the like. A few seconds later, Musa zoomed past us with a haggard face, as if he was running for his life, followed by a highly excited cavalcade of youngsters who nearly trampled on Rachel. I started running after them through the door and across the street and figured out for some reason or another they wanted to beat Musa up. Rob was leading the hunt and Max was close on his heels. After a few minutes they caught up with Musa and started hitting him with a plank and with their fists. I had a hard time trying to restrain both of them at the same time, and Max kept threatening to beat me up as well. The passers-by were bemused. The situation seemed quite hopeless, until a group of muscular black men came round and told Max and Rob to call it a day. They didn't seem to have hit Musa too viciously, though his mouth was bleeding badly. Later, I learnt what the fuss was all about. Musa is a black boy who turned up at the door only 2 days ago when I happened to be at the gate. He told me that he needed a place to stay immediately and that he was even prepared to pay his weekly rent straight away if necessary. He looked a bit strange, but on the whole I liked him, and since we never refuse hospitality to anyone, I gave him a bed and a blanket and some food. Later, he was seen wandering around the building aimlessly and behaving like a bit of a lunatic. And today, I'm told, he asked Louise for a light, and after she refused, he suddenly hit her hard in the stomach. Louise is pregnant and has already had 3 miscarriages. Rob, her boyfriend, flew into a violent rage when he learnt what Musa had done. After beating up Musa, he called an ambulance and took Louise to the hospital, but she has miscarried again. This is the first incident of actual violence that I've witnessed myself since I came more than a month ago. To put things in perspective, I should mention that the beating was not a severe one, that the offence was obviously very serious, that Rob and Louise don't live in the squat, and that the beating took place in the street, outside the control of the community. All the same, what happened to Louise herself is horrifying. By the time this whole incident came to an end, the meeting had already started, and Rachel and Arnold were explaining the position of the council, the requirements of the fire brigade, and the crucial need for a licence. Arnold and Rachel's commitment to the squat is wonderful, but will the council really be able to get its act together, and when? The next crucial date is September 26th, when Arnold's proposals will be submitted to the housing committee, hopefully with an assurance from the owner or his agent that a licence is to be granted shortly. Meanwhile, we still have no loos, no electricity, and the garbage is still piling up in the backyard. And of course, there is the short-term fire protection problem. All these plans of improvement are fine, and it may be that they're the only lasting solution in sight, but meanwhile we're living in a matchbox, perhaps even a matchbox inhabited by a pyromaniac. The night vigils go some way towards solving the problem, but only a short way.
Thursday, September 14th.
Out all day. Came back at 3 a.m. Then had a really long chat with Alex, who was on night duty. I really like him. He's a simple man without pretensions and with a good heart. Never mind if he does get into a fight once in a while, and if he is the biggest thief on earth. That's his own words. I never cease to discover with amazement how, when it comes to the better self, everyone here is immensely likeable. Even Og, or Mel, or Max.
Friday, September 15th.
Went to the London Electricity Board in the morning to inquire about the possibility of an electricity connection. We're not inclined to wait for the council for that. When I came back, I learnt that there had been yet another fire, this time in Craig and Pauline's room. Of course, everyone was convinced that it was arson again. According to Craig, someone set fire to one part of his room even as he was sleeping in the other part. Further, Og claims to know exactly who was in the building at that time, and among the few names on this list is Richard, who was immediately singled out by Dave as the likely culprit. So by the time Richard came back in the afternoon, after finally getting his first social security payment, he had become suspect number 1. To make things worse, as soon as he arrived, he triumphantly showed some publications he'd just brought back from the Freedom Bookshop, including a detailed do-it-yourself manual on how to sabotage nuclear power plants. Awful timing. I, for one, am not completely convinced that it is arson again. In this case, there is little evidence of it. There are often many candles burning in Pauline and Craig's room which has no window, and it's all too plausible that an accident happened and that they tried to get away with blaming someone else. Fortunately, the fire was extinguished without any need to call the fire brigade. This new fire marked yet another setback in the life of the squat. Several residents left in disgust or fear. There are only 40 of us left now, and among those who are staying, the morale is low. The place is getting dirty again, and no one seems to have enough motivation to pick up a mop or a brush. Very few people turned up for dinner tonight, and those who did chewed their potatoes and parsnips in silence, in the darkness of the kitchen, wondering again and again, who did it? When I came back at 2 a.m, there was no one on night duty and the door was closed. Max and Scum were supposed to be on duty, but they were away at a festival, so I had to get in through a window. I found Jeff hanging around in the kitchen and talked with him for a while. Jeff is not the most popular figure in the squat. Some even accuse him of having stolen things from other people's rooms. He tends to keep aloof and rarely helps around or participates in meetings. But he's not a bad boy. Tonight he was in a reflective mood and told me how he had been in care from the age of 8 and how at the age of 19 his future doesn't seem too bright. He has a deep sense of failure and doesn't know what to do with his life. This is a rare occasion when I've learnt about someone's past. Usually people here don't ask you questions about where you used to live and what you used to do. You're taken for what you are now and treated as such. So far no one has asked me, for instance, what I have been doing in London for the last 3 years or where I go in the evenings. Since I observe the same discretion, I find myself knowing very little about the people who live here, who they really are, and what they have been up to in the past. For that, I have to look at the newspaper cuttings. Journalists have found out a lot of things that remain mystery to me during their flying visits to the squat.
Saturday, September 16th.
The squat started coming back to life again today. Pauline managed to cook a good meal and we decided to have a general clean-up tomorrow. Though the numbers are down, it's clear that those who stayed are the more committed ones, and if there are no further fires, I think that we have a good chance of pulling ourselves together. It's interesting that the fires have scared off many more men than women. In fact, most of the women have stayed. The main exceptions, apart from the passing travellers, have been a few young women who obviously had other options. I can't help feeling that this is because the squat provides homeless women with a more secure and friendly environment than they would be able to find in most other places. Except for the awful thing that happened to Louise the other day, I'm not aware of any incident of sexual harassment having occurred since I came, and any such incident would almost certainly be a source of extremely strong resentment from everyone. There were 2 cases in February, both of which resulted in the immediate expulsion of the offender. Apart from Marianne, at the moment, all the female members of the squat live here with a boyfriend or husband of some sort. There have been single women or groups of women in the past. Some of these companionships spring from the most improbable romances. If I were a young woman, I really don't think that I would easily fall in love with characters like Bobby, Muzzy or Craig, all of whom are rather thick, immature, unreliable and heavily into drugs. But the striking thing is that all 3 of them have very gifted and delightful girlfriends, respectively Rachel, Sarah and Pauline, and their relationships are astonishingly enduring, in spite of regular and sometimes bitter quarrels. The most resilient couple consists of Rachel and Bobby, who met here a few days after the squat took off last January, and who have been passionately in love ever since. They hardly leave each other's side. Unfortunately, the general tensions that we've had to cope with since the fire seem to have reflected on these relationships, and I sense widening cracks in some of them. A notice was posted on the notice board today by the fire brigade explaining in detail what has to be done to meet minimal safety requirements. The only part of these instructions that we can carry out is the evacuation of the top 2 floors. The rest involves a lot of expenditure and depends crucially on the council's financial help.
Sunday, September 17th.
Today's clean-up was extremely successful and gave all of us a further boost. Everyone who was around participated, and by the end of the day the whole building was in good shape again, in spite of a nearly total absence of proper cleaning equipment. The top 2 floors were cleared and sealed off, except that Arthur insists in staying in his room on the 2nd floor. His argument is that the notice of the fire brigade only contains recommendations, that there's no point in carrying one of them out if the others depend on the council, and that his room is the safest one in the building. By now Dave is more or less in the same position as Peter was a month ago. He collects the rent and is usually the first person that people consult when a problem arises or a visitor turns up. But Dave is a much less prominent figure than Peter used to be, partly because there are several other active figures around, namely Pauline, Barbara, Og, Max, myself, Arthur, and Richard in some ways, and a few others. And Dave acts essentially as a dedicated coordinator without attempting in any way to impose his authority on anyone. Let's hope he lasts longer than Peter. Looking back on it, the way Peter literally vanished without warning was worthy of someone who is said to have been an actor. He had an argument with Pauline, freaked out when she made the absurd accusation that he was drinking the rent, and walked straight through the door. None of us have ever seen him again since. He didn't even go up to his room, and all his belongings went up in flames when we had the fire. God knows where he is now and what he's doing. I slept in the afternoon and unfortunately woke up only after the weekly meeting, but from what I heard, it was a short and quiet meeting and no major decisions were taken. People were exhorted once again to pay their rent. So far only a few have paid. Some swear that they will pay if others pay. Others complain that we're not getting 3 meals a day, so why should we pay £5? But it's hard to buy food if there is no money in the cash box. In the evening, I had a brief chat with Michael Keane of Christchurch. I learnt that he was discreetly helping a few of the more reliable people in the squat, led by Arthur and including Dave, Jerry, Marianne and Andy, to form a housing cooperative and get proper accommodation. This is not a bad idea, except that it will take the cream away from us at the squat. He feels that the squat itself will not last because, to quote him, it's not practical.
Monday, September 18th.
Out all day.
Tuesday, September 19th.
Life goes on peacefully at number 1 Clapham Road. We seem to be slowly recovering from the trauma of the fire. The numbers are limited, but those who decide to stay tend to get on well with each other. Sometimes the atmosphere is depressing, with a feeling that the place has been deserted and it will never be the same again. But often it takes little to make things look much brighter. A bit of sweeping, tea on the stove, and a lot of chatting. 5 more have left. But there are new faces too, for the first time since the fire.
Wednesday, September 20th.
Today we have made further progress on the way to recovery. Richard spent hours meticulously sorting the carrots, spuds, breads, parsnips and other goodies recently delivered in large quantities by the Simon community. He kept the rotting vegetables for Nancy Kershaw for her compost and stored the rotting fruit on the top floor to make wine. He obviously enjoyed himself and did a great job of rearranging and refurbishing the kitchen. In the evening he cooked a splendid vegetable curry. The spirit of cooperation comes and goes like a virus, and today there was a wave of other initiatives. Scum announced that he was going to organise a barbecue. Arthur, who seems to be taking renewed interest in the life of the squat these days, and even told me that after all he was going to move from the 2nd floor to keep the peace. He put a notice on the notice board about the surgery that he's just arranged for us with the help of SHHARP. Dave posted a notice about recent developments in our dealings with the council, and I added something about the electricity. Through these small things, and the many other positive vibrations of a friendly day, togetherness grows, and a community builds up. When I left the squat in the early evening, I had the familiar deep feeling of happiness that I get when the squat is doing well. I love being able to walk away with peace in my heart, knowing that those who stay behind will look cheerfully after themselves and each other, and deal creatively with the problems that may arise. I love knowing that, on days like this, they too are happy.
Thursday, September 21st.
Today the spirits were low. Most of the squatters get their social security money on Thursday, and immediately after that many get hopelessly pissed, so the day tends to be lonely and the evening rowdy. The weather was rainy. So much for Scum's barbecue, and the squat wore a deserted look until the drunkards turned up. To make things worse, I heard Richard declare for the first time ever that he was fed up with doing all the donkey work while others messed around. "Now," said he, I'm going to enjoy myself the whole day and certainly not do any work." I really can't blame him, but I hope that he's not going to stick to this resolution. I also met Julian in Kennington Park. He was tenser than ever. He left the squat a few days ago, but now feels that this was jumping from the frying pan into the fire, and complains that the chap he now lives with is a neurotic who talks all the time and smashes things around. He's desperate, doesn't know where to go, but rules out coming back to the squat. There is an objective reason for this, aside from the whole question of cultural alienation. At the time of the fire, Julian was in possession of the £80 that we'd withdrawn from our account to pay the water bill and buy some cleaning equipment. Later he claimed that someone had taken advantage of the confusion during the night of the fire to pinch the money from under his mattress. This was a rather gross story, given that his room was on the top floor where people were desperately running for their lives when the fire broke out. The issue was discussed at a meeting, and it was decided that Julian would be requested to produce the money. He left soon after. Pauline too was in a disconsolate mood. She spent a large part of the morning sitting silently in the kitchen in a state of apparent shock. When I asked her what was the matter, she just replied, "Craig fucked off with me gyro." Pauline and Craig are common law husband and wife and have a common social security number. Today, Craig collected the money and disappeared. Pauline said she didn't want to see him ever again. On top of all this, there was a ferocious quarrel in the evening between Bobby and Fat Steve, both of whom were completely sozzled. Both were shouting things like, "I don't want to fight with him, he's my mate." But they seemed to think that they had to fight for some obscure reason, apparently connected with Rachel, that's Bobby's girlfriend. Eddie wasn't around this time to diffuse the tension with a cheeky joke, but Ringo soon appeared on the scene. Ringo, who used to live with us, is a shy fellow with a baby face, but he has colossal strength and the reputation of being afraid of nothing. He spent some time in a military prison before being kicked out of the army. He grabbed Steve and Bobby by the neck like two rabbits, one in each hand, and told them calmly that if they carried on fighting, he would smash their heads against one another. They were paralysed with fear, and the peace was restored.
Friday, September 22nd.
Today, we pulled ourselves together again. The place was a real mess in the morning, but we had a massive clean-up by midday, and things looked bright and lively. The sound of a recorder could even be heard in the corridors as Barbara was teaching Pauline a few tunes. In the afternoon, we had a flying visit from Linda Bellos, a local councillor who used to be the leader of Lambeth Council, flanked by Rachel Webb, Arnold Porter, Jan Clive, Nancy Kershaw and Ian McGowan. Linda led a hurried tour of the place, declared her full support for this project and made promises. Viewed from inside, the whole troupe looked like a bit of a joke, but they all mean well, and who knows, they might even produce some results in the end. I nagged Arnold Porter once again on the question of garbage removal, and he promised to do something about it immediately. We're all anxiously waiting for the results of the Housing Committee meeting on Tuesday, but personally I don't care too much for the ambitious improvement plans of the council, except for the fire protection measures. Garbage collection, drainage and perhaps electricity are our priorities. The rest, I think, matters little. In fact, I can see some danger of the whole idea backfiring badly. The worst scenario would be something like this. The council spends a lot of money on providing us with hot water, electricity, showers, loos and whatnot. But all these facilities soon get vandalised, and then the council turns around and says, "We tried to help you, and look at the mess you've made." And the whole Belgrave homeless project is branded as a failure, when in fact it isn't. This is not to mention the fact that internally the atmosphere could also get poisoned, as the comforts attract all sorts of cranks and sharks, management problems get more complex, and authoritarian structures creep in. So far we've managed to stick to the system of night watches, partly thanks to the dynamism of the security team headed by Max and Og. The side door, which is now used as an entrance rather than a front gate, is closed during the night, but there's always someone at the door to let people in. Today, when I came back at 3 a.m, I found a lively party of card players, which included Og, in the watchroom. They gambled all night and stopped only at 10 a.m.
Saturday, September 23rd.
Another sweet day, with a good atmosphere most of the time. I tidied up the kitchen with Dave and Richard in the morning. Richard, who loves cooking and getting generally absorbed in food matters, prepared a superb bubble and squeak with yesterday's leftovers. This was supposed to be his breakfast, but he instinctively divided it into 3 portions, one for Dave, one for me, and one for himself. Then a girl called Wendy, a friend of Scum and Max who joined us a few days ago, turned up and asked Richard whether she would taste his bubble and squeak. He seemed completely stoned, and after he handed her his plate, she proceeded to eat more than half of it with an absent look and a radiant smile. Poor Richard was looking quite discomfited, but he didn't say anything, and only sighed with relief when she eventually decided to stop this gluttony and gave him the remnants without so much as a word of thanks. Dane, the guy who was at the gate with Marianne on the first day, turned up this morning after several weeks of absence. He came out of prison yesterday, got terribly pissed to celebrate, and the same evening ended up in the nick again. He must have got into a fight or something like that. He was taken to court this morning and given bail on the understanding that he was living in rented accommodation, he was not to go near a pub, and he would stay at home between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m. He thought he'd really taken the judge for a ride and was very amused. He asked me whether there were any t-shirts around, and I showed him something I thought was quite good looking, plain blue, but he hated it. And later I saw him wearing a horrid printed t-shirt with some kind of satanic design and a few ugly words about death, hell and sex. Dane really dresses like a baddie. Military boots, tattered jeans, abominable t-shirt, macho tattoos and Mohican hairstyle. And he's definitely not inclined to let anyone tread on his toes. But he's also one of the most delightful fellows around. He always pays his rent, and this time he even volunteered to pay £10 on his return from prison. I like him a lot, and I'm very glad that he's back. I met Nick in the street. He left a couple of days ago after being let down by a woman he had just fallen in love with. He had slit himself all over his chest, perhaps to impress her, and looked even more of a wreck than usual. Nick is a sad case of a young bloke full of potential and goodwill, but increasingly destroyed by alcohol and drugs. I dreamt of being caught in a fire for the 4th time since the nightmare of 2 weeks ago. I asked a few others whether they had similar dreams, and they all said yes.
Sunday, September 24th.
When I came down in the morning, I found Eddie and Marianne sitting gloomily in the kitchen, surrounded by litter and beer cans and remnants of food, waiting for people to get up and for the squat to come to life. This is a familiar, cheerless scene, but it didn't take long to transform the atmosphere. I swept the floor, Eddie prepared some tea, and Marianne brought her radio and turned it so loud, she's a bit hard of hearing, that the squat was soon filled with the sound of joyful hymns. A good atmosphere persisted throughout the day. Brother Adrian brought us food last night, mountains of bread, carrots, potatoes and vegetables of all sorts. He collects outdated food from Marks and Spencer's for the Simon community, and once in a while delivers a van load of it here. He's been coming every Saturday for the last 3 weeks, and these deliveries have played a crucial role in enabling us to keep cooking at least one good meal every day, almost invariably a vegetable stew or curry, in spite of the fact that very few people pay their rent. Brother Adrian's deliveries are topped up by small purchases from whatever rent gets collected, leftover vegetables and fruit from a local shop, some scavenging at the back of supermarkets, and occasional donations from neighbours and friends. Nancy Kershaw helps us with tea and sugar. Pauline and Barbara have gradually given up the heavy responsibility of running the kitchen. At the moment, different people volunteer to cook and clean on different days. Many people enjoy getting involved with food, and this arrangement gives them a chance to contribute something and have some fun at the same time. It's been very successful so far. Ray came back from hospital today. He's a great friend of Og, but for some reason or another, Og punched him badly in the face a few days ago. Og used to visit Ray while he was in hospital, partly, Og admitted, to watch TV there, and they now chat and laugh together as if nothing had happened. We were due to have a meeting in the evening, but there was hardly anyone around at the appointed time and the meeting was cancelled. Normally this would be regarded as a failure, but today it seemed perfectly natural. There wasn't much to discuss and we're doing well as things stand, and we do communicate with each other through the notice board. So in this case, the cancellation of the meeting felt like a success rather than a failure. After it became clear that there were not enough people around to hold a meeting, Richard wrote "Apathy rules, but who gives a shit" on the notice announcing the meeting. And then we cheerfully returned to our vegetable stew. On the whole, this week was an exceptionally good one. There's been very little trouble apart from the aborted clash between Bobby and Steve. An unusual degree of cooperation and initiative, and, most important, a strong and growing sense of community. In the evening, 3 impoverished tourists turned up at the door, asking for hospitality. 2 of them were Italian and the third claimed to be French, although he didn't speak a word of French. We took them in. They're not really typical of our target group, but if this place has provided a refuge from time to time to some helpless traveller, that too makes me rejoice. They were itching to cook spaghetti and found evident relief in a lavish meal.